The Deception. The observation dome of the Galactic Council flagship, Eternal Ascendance, offered Admiral Zarn an unparalleled view of his armada. 5,000 vessels of varying sizes spread across the void, their formation precise and threatening. Zarn's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture of satisfaction among his species. After 3 decades of service to the Council, this would be his crowning achievement, bringing the mysterious Solarian Confederacy into the fold. The humans continue to refuse our communication attempts. Admiral, reported Sub-Commander Vex, her scaled skin reflecting the blue light of nearby Earth. Zarn turned from the viewport. As expected, the Solarians have avoided Council contact for nearly a century. Their isolation ends today. The Galactic Council had united over 700 species across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Peace through unity, prosperity through cooperation. These were the Council's stated goals. Yet some worlds remained stubbornly independent. Earth and its handful of colony worlds, collectively known as the Solarian Confederacy, represented the most prominent holdout in this sector. Our intelligence confirms they possess only moderate space combat capabilities, continued Vex, scrolling through data on her tablet. Their fleet consists primarily of escort-class vessels with a handful of cruisers, nothing that could challenge our armada. And yet, Zarn mused, they've maintained independence despite being surrounded by Council space. Curious, don't you think? Vex's expression remained neutral. Perhaps they've simply been overlooked. Until now, Zarn finished. He straightened his ceremonial cape, adorned with medals from numerous campaigns. Prepare the fleet for approach. Standard intimidation formation. Let's show the humans what they're facing. The Council armada moved with coordinated precision, thousands of vessels arranging themselves in a 3-dimensional grid that maximized visual impact. It was a formation designed not for combat efficiency but psychological effect, a display of overwhelming force meant to induce surrender without battle. At Earth's L2 Lagrange point, Commander Maya Reyes watched the approaching Council armada with practiced calm. Her command center inside Sentinel Station buzzed with controlled activity as officers monitored the incoming fleet. They're making quite the entrance, observed her XO, Commander Chen, studying the tactical display. I count over 5,000 vessels. Matches our intelligence estimates. Reyes nodded, her dark eyes never leaving the display. Right on schedule. Operation Lighthouse is now active. Send the alert to all Solarian forces. We are now at Defense Condition Alpha. Chen hesitated. Commander, permission to speak freely? Always, David. Our visible fleet is outnumbered 20-1. Even with the defense platforms, we can't hold them off for long. Are we certain this deception is necessary? Reyes finally turned from the display, meeting her XO's concerned gaze. The Council believes we're a minor power with limited technology. This perception has protected us for nearly a century. She lowered her voice. If they discovered what we really are, what we've accomplished, they would bring their full might against us, not just this regional fleet. I understand the strategy, Chen replied. I just hate the thought of losing ships and people to maintain a facade. Every captain and crew volunteered knowing the risks, Reyes said firmly. They understand what's at stake. She placed a hand on Chen's shoulder. Besides, the losses will be minimized. The lighthouse protocols were designed to appear devastating while prioritizing crew survival. Their conversation was interrupted by a communications officer. Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the Council flagship. On screen, Reyes ordered, straightening her uniform. Admiral Zarn's image appeared, his 4 eyes blinking asynchronously, a sign of confidence in his culture. Solarian Command, this is Admiral Zarn of the Galactic Council Expeditionary Fleet. Your continued isolation from galactic affairs ends today. The Council requires your immediate surrender and integration. Resistance is inadvisable. Reyes allowed a moment of silence before responding. Admiral Zarn, this is Commander Reyes of the Solarian Defense Force. The Solarian Confederacy respectfully declined your offer. We have no interest in council membership or oversight. Zarn's upper eyes narrowed. Commander, perhaps I'm not being clear. This is not a negotiation. Earth will join the council. The only question is whether you do so peacefully or after your defenses are eliminated. We understand perfectly, Admiral. We simply disagree. Reyes maintained an expression of calm determination. The Solarian Confederacy values its independence. We will defend it. Very well, Zarn replied. You have one planetary rotation to reconsider before we commence operations. The transmission ended. Chen studied the tactical display. Their fleet is arranging into offensive formation. Looks like they won't wait the full rotation period. They never intended to, Reyes replied. Begin evacuation of non-essential personnel from our forward positions. Deploy our fleet as planned. Defensive posture, prioritizing visible strength at orbital junctions. And the avalanche assets? Chen asked quietly. Remain dormant, Reyes replied. Phase 1 is deception. We show them exactly what they expect to see. A moderately advanced civilization facing overwhelming odds. Within hours, the Council fleet launched its first assault. Their initial target was predictable. The Solarian defense platforms positioned around Earth's moon. Hundreds of Council vessels swarmed the lunar outposts, their energy weapons carving through the apparently outdated Solarian defenses. Aboard the Eternal Ascendants, Admiral Zarn watched the battle with growing confidence. Their defensive capabilities are even more limited than intelligence suggested. He remarked to his command staff. Their platforms are falling with minimal resistance. The Solarian fleet is moving to engage, Admiral reported his tactical officer. They appear to be attempting to protect evacuation shuttles from the lunar colonies. Predictable, Zarn said dismissively. Target their capital ships. Once their command structure is compromised, resistance will crumble. The space between Earth and its moon became a battlefield as the Solarian fleet engaged the Council forces. To observers, it appeared a severely mismatched conflict. The Solarian vessels, though fighting with apparent determination, were steadily pushed back by the overwhelming Council force. In her command center, Commander Reyes watched the carefully orchestrated retreat. Status reports flowed in. Ships crippled or destroyed according to plan. Crews secretly evacuating through masked escape pods while their vessels produced the expected signatures of catastrophic failure. Lunar defense perimeter has fallen, reported Chen. Our fleet is regrouping at Mars orbital position as planned. Reyes nodded grimly. Casualties. 8 confirmed. 17 injured. All ship crews executed their evacuation protocols successfully. Reyes closed her eyes briefly. Even one loss was too many, but they had prepared for worse. Proceed with Phase 2. Fall back to the Mars perimeter and prepare for the next engagement. Over the next 72 hours, the pattern repeated. The Solarian forces fought with apparent desperation, employing tactics that showed ingenuity but ultimately proved insufficient against the Council's superior numbers and technology. Their defense line was pushed back from Mars to the asteroid belt, and finally to Jupiter's orbit. Admiral Zarn grew increasingly confident as the Solarian resistance weakened. Their tactics are impressive, he admitted during a strategy session, but their technology is simply no match for Council capabilities. They fight well for a minor power, observed his intelligence officer, a tall, slender being with translucent skin. Almost too well, considering their limitations. Zarn dismissed the concern. Determination can compensate for technological disparity, to a point. But that point has been reached. Their main fleet is now cornered at Jupiter's orbital line. Our analysts predict total collapse within the next 12 hours. At the Jupiter defense line, the remnants of the visible Solarian fleet prepared for their last stand. Their ships, apparently damaged and running on emergency power, formed a ragged defensive formation around Europa Station, ostensibly the last major Solarian outpost before Earth itself. Commander Reyes, now operating from an emergency command post on Europa, addressed her remaining captains via secure channel. "This is it, the final phase of Operation Lighthouse. You've all performed admirably." Her voice carried the weight of the past 3 days of calculated retreat. "After the next engagement, initiate emergency protocols and prepare for protocol avalanche activation." One of the captains, her face haggard from simulated battle stress, asked the question on everyone's mind. "Commander, when will avalanche be triggered?" "When Admiral Zarn commits his full force against Earth," Rise replied. "Our intelligence suggests he's planning his victory announcement already. His overconfidence is our advantage." The Council fleet launched its final assault against the Jupiter defense line with overwhelming force. The battle was swift and decisive. Solarian ships fought bravely, but were quickly overwhelmed. Europa Station appeared to suffer catastrophic damage, with emergency evacuation pods launching in all directions. From the observation dome of the Eternal Ascendants, Admiral Zarn watched with satisfaction as the last visible Solarian defenses crumbled. The path to Earth now lay open. "Prepare my address to the Council," he instructed his communications officer. "Inform them that the Solarian Confederacy has been subdued and will shortly be integrated into Council territory." As the Council fleet regrouped and prepared for its final approach to Earth, none of its sensors detected the subtle energy fluctuations beginning to ripple through the outer solar system. Deep within the dwarf planet Pluto, beneath the ice sheets of Neptune's moon Triton, and hidden within the swirling storms of Saturn, ancient machinery began to awaken. Protocol avalanche had begun. The revelation. Admiral Zarn stood before his assembled command staff, his posture radiating triumph. The holographic display showed Earth, now seemingly defenseless after the destruction of the Solarian fleet at Jupiter. "The Council will be pleased," remarked Sub-Commander Vex. "A new member world acquired with minimal Council casualties." "Indeed," Zarn replied. "Send the final approach orders. I want our fleet in Earth orbit within 24 hours. Prepare occupation protocols as well. I anticipate some planet-side resistance." As the orders went out, a junior sensor officer approached hesitantly. "Admiral, we're detecting unusual energy readings from the outer system." Zarn glanced at the officer with mild irritation. "Elaborate." "Multiple anomalies, sir. They began approximately 30 minutes ago. Our instruments initially classified them as background radiation fluctuations, but they're increasing in intensity and frequency." Vex studied the data on her tablet, likely aftereffects from the battle at Jupiter. Perhaps weapons discharge interacting with the gas giant's magnetic field. The sensor officer persisted. "With respect, Sub-Commander, these readings originate from multiple points throughout the system: Pluto, Neptune, Saturn, and several points in the asteroid belt. They don't match any known weapons discharge pattern." Zarn's 4 eyes narrowed. "Maintain observation but proceed with the approach to Earth. Whatever these anomalies are, they pose no threat to our Armada." 12 hours later, as the Council fleet passed the orbit of Mars, the anomalies could no longer be dismissed. Massive energy spikes registered throughout the solar system, and strange spatial distortions began appearing on long-range sensors. "Admiral," Vex reported urgently, "the distortions are expanding. They appear to be openings of some kind." Zarn hurried to the main bridge, his earlier confidence wavering. "Openings to what?" Before Vex could respond, the tactical display updated with alarming new information. Objects were emerging from the spatial distortions, massive objects, each dwarfing the largest Council vessels. "Classification," Zarn demanded. The tactical officer worked frantically at his console. "Unknown vessel type. Admiral." "But they're enormous. Preliminary size estimates suggest each is at least 5 kilometers in length." "Impossible," Zarn whispered, but the evidence continued mounting on the displays around him. In total, 24 massive vessels emerged from the spatial distortions positioned strategically throughout the solar system. Their design was unlike anything in Council records: sleek, angular constructs of dark material that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. As they moved into formation, Their true scale became apparent. Each vessel was indeed 5 to 7 kilometers in length, with what appeared to be weapon emplacements larger than entire Council cruisers. "They're moving to surround our fleet," reported the tactical officer, unable to keep the fear from his voice. "Formation suggests coordinated strategy." "Solarian vessels?" Zarn asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Energy signatures match what we've observed from other Solarian technology, but at exponentially higher levels," confirmed Vex. "Admiral, I believe we've been deceived." A communication request flashed on the main display. Zarn hesitated before nodding to his communications officer. "Put it through." The screen filled with the image of Commander Rice, the same officer who had supposedly perished when Europa Station was destroyed. She appeared uninjured, seated in what was clearly a command center far more advanced than anything the Solarians had previously revealed. "Admiral Zarn," she began without preamble, "I believe it's time we had an honest conversation." Zarn struggled to maintain his composure. "Commander Reyes, reports of your demise were apparently premature." A slight smile crossed Reyes' face. "As were reports of our technological limitations. What you're witnessing is the actual Solarian defense fleet. What you've been fighting for the past 3 days was our scout force, a carefully maintained facade." "Impossible," Zarn replied, though the evidence surrounded his fleet. "Our intelligence on Earth spans decades." "Yes," Reyes acknowledged. "Intelligence we provided. The Solarian Confederacy has been observing the Galactic Council for over a century, Admiral. We've studied your expansion, your methods of peaceful integration, and your treatment of worlds that refuse membership." On the tactical display, the massive Solarian vessels continued their methodical encirclement of the Council fleet. Their movement was precise, unhurried, the confidence of overwhelming force. "You've been hiding this." Zarn gestured to the display showing one of the enormous vessels. "For what purpose?" "Protection," Reyes replied simply. "Humanity learned long ago that revealing technological advantage invites either conquest or coercion. We chose to appear as just another moderate spacefaring civilization, while developing our capabilities in secret." Vex leaned close to Zarn's ear. "Admiral, those vessels have us completely surrounded. Tactical analysis suggests their firepower could obliterate our entire fleet within minutes." Zarn felt the weight of 5,000 crews resting on his decision. "What are your terms, Commander?" "Surprisingly reasonable, given the circumstances," Reyes replied. "The Council fleet will withdraw from Solarian space immediately. The Galactic Council will formally recognize the Solarian Confederacy as a sovereign entity with all associated rights and privileges. No Council vessels will enter Solarian territory without explicit permission." "And if we refuse?" Zarn asked, though the answer was obvious. Reyes' expression hardened slightly. "Don't test our resolve, Admiral. We could have destroyed your fleet at any point during this engagement. We chose diplomacy instead. I suggest you do the same." To demonstrate her point, one of the massive Solarian vessels oriented toward a nearby uninhabited asteroid. A pencil-thin beam of blue energy lanced out, striking the kilometer-wide rock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the asteroid silently disintegrated into fine dust. That was approximately 1% of that vessel's main weapon capacity, Reyes noted calmly. "We await your decision, Admiral." Zarn turned to his command staff, seeing the grim realization on their faces. "Begin withdrawal procedures," he ordered quietly. "All vessels to reverse course and exit the system via the same route we entered." "A wise choice," Reyes acknowledged. "A diplomatic vessel will contact the Council regarding formal recognition of our sovereignty. For now, we will provide your fleet safe passage out of our territory." As the Council fleet began its humiliating retreat, Zarn remained on the bridge, watching the massive Solarian vessels that shadowed their withdrawal. His career was likely finished, but at least his crew would survive. "I don't understand," Vex said quietly beside him. "If they possessed such technology, why maintain the charade?" Why not simply demonstrate their power when we first arrived? Zarn considered this. Because they wanted to learn. Sub-Commander. Not just about our military capabilities, but about our character. How we fight. How we treat a supposedly weaker opponent. He turned to face her, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, this time signaling resignation. And I suspect we failed their test. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council chamber on Axis Prime fell silent as Admiral Zarn concluded his report. Representatives from hundreds of species sat in stunned silence as the implications became clear. Supreme Counselor Thax finally broke the silence. You're telling us this minor power, this isolated human confederation, has been concealing technology centuries beyond our own, that they could potentially challenge the entire Council fleet. That is my assessment, Zarn confirmed. Our intelligence on Earth has been comprehensively wrong for decades. The humans deliberately presented themselves as a developing civilization while building something far more advanced in secret. What do we know about these dimensional pocket technologies? Asked the science minister. Could we replicate them? Unknown, Zarn replied. But I would advise caution in any technological espionage attempts. The Solarians demonstrated only a fraction of their capabilities. Their monitoring of our activities is likely far more comprehensive than we realized. The defense minister leaned forward. Are they a threat to the Council? Zarn considered carefully before answering. No, at least, not an immediate one. They seem content with isolation and recognition of their sovereignty. They could have destroyed my fleet but chose diplomacy instead. For now, muttered a counselor from the back. Indeed, for now, Zarn acknowledged. But I believe we should respect their terms. The alternative would be costly. As the Council debated their response to this new galactic reality, Commander Reyes stood in the observation dome of Avalanche Command, the massive station hidden within Pluto's ice mantle. Before her stretched the vast construction yards, where additional vessels of the Solarian fleet were being assembled. The Council fleet has left the exclusion boundary, reported Commander Chen. Our diplomatic vessel reports the Council is in emergency session, but early indications suggest they'll recognize our sovereignty. Reyes nodded. And Operation Lighthouse. All participants accounted for. The memorial service for our 8 lost personnel is scheduled for next week. Chen paused. The deception worked perfectly. The question now is, what next? Reyes watched as a new dreadnought moved out of its construction cradle, its dark hull gleaming in the distant sunlight. We continue watching, David. Humanity spent centuries fighting itself before reaching the stars. We know how quickly peace can turn to war. And if the Council decides to test our resolve despite what they've seen. Reyes turned from the viewport, her expression resolute. Then they'll discover we showed them only the surface of our capabilities. The deception never ends. It just changes form. In the darkness beyond Pluto, silent sentinels maintain their eternal vigil, watching for threats from deeper space. Threats the Galactic Council couldn't begin to imagine. Humanity's true purpose, its real reason for technological secrecy, remained hidden behind yet another carefully crafted facade. The Watchers continued their silent guard.